Russian emergency services say fragments of the plane have been found in the countryside, about 40 kilometers from Domodedovo. There were 65 passengers and 6 crew on board. Investigators say the crew did not report any technical problems for the disaster. The black box, one of them, the one that records the flight's information, that has been found. TRT World correspondent and pilot himself, Joseph Hayat, is in the studio with me now. So one black box recorder has been found. I don't know whether it's critically or not, but it's not the voice recorder. You've been gathering some data from other sources, Joseph. What has that data told you?
Well, the data indicates that the Antonov AN-148, it was on departure, it was in the climb phase, and it was closing to 2,000 meters. Now, at that point, it suddenly decided to rapidly descend for reasons we're unknown at this time, but it was at a very, very rapid rate, shortly after which it impacted the terrain. And now, during all of these phases, there was no distress call given to air traffic control. So it's unclear what the state of affairs were, but initial indications suggest that it was a very rapid situation and that the crew had little time to react to it.
Presumably, once they find the voice data recorder, there will be something. The pilot will presumably have been speaking to his co-pilot as he tried to rescue the situation. But if there's no distress call, does that say something in itself?
To a degree. I mean, the standard procedure across all airliners and airlines is that you have a pilot flying and a pilot non-flying. So the pilot flying would have initially responded to the crisis, while the pilot non-flying would have been monitoring the instruments, checking the emergency procedures and checklists, and trying to keep in communication with air traffic control. As we say, because they weren't able to contact ATC, the situation was clearly very demanding. What's particularly interesting about this crash in the impact site is how widely spread the debris is. Now, correlating to the radar data, that suggests it did impact at very high speed. Though, I mean, given the aircraft's history, I mean, of this particular model, the AN-148, they have been relatively reliable. There's only one known other accident in its history. That occurred during its testing phase when that particular aircraft in 2011 exceeded its maximum excess speed, the speed it's allowed to travel to safely before it begins to disintegrate. So the fact that the aircraft is so widespread at the crash site, that could suggest perhaps it did disintegrate in the final stages of its flight.
The eyewitnesses who have spoken about seeing the plane on fire as it came down, if those eyewitness testimonies are proven to be correct, how can a plane catch fire in the middle of a flight?
Well, if there was perhaps an uncontained engine failure, for example, where parts of the engine basically exited the cowlings, the surrounding metal, and they perhaps took out hydraulic lines or fuel lines, they could very easily ignite the fuel or perhaps cause the aircraft to be uncontrollable. We refer back to the 1980s, the very famous case, United 232. It was a big DC-10 airliner. The rear engine, it had a failure, an uncontained engine failure. Fragments cut through the hydraulics. Luckily, they managed to land the plane, but it was a very, very desperate situation. In a much smaller aircraft like the Antonov AN-148, where the engines are literally right next to the passenger cabin, if there was an uncontained engine failure, that situation could have developed quite rapidly.